Appalachian Writers Heritage Award, Ernest Gaines Award for Literary Excellence, Judy Gaines Young Award, Weatherford Award in Fiction, Appalachian Book of the Year, named Southerner of the Year by Southern Living Magazine. Crystal Wilkinson has created her books while raising 3 children, mostly as a single mother, while teaching at Morehead State, Indiana University, Eastern Kentucky, Berea College, and the University of Kentucky. I may have missed something, but I remember those. She has helped raise grandchildren, been co-owner of a bookstore twice, and like her beloved grandmother before her, fed all who showed up at her table. We'll learn more about what she fed them and the stories and recipes behind those meals in her forthcoming book, Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghosts, Stories and Recipes from 5 Generations of Black Country Cooks. Please help me in welcoming the astonishing, the brilliant, the perfect Crystal Wilkinson.
Sorry, this was set up properly whenever I left, but for some reason it changed.
Maybe get out of it and start it over. There we go. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Corey. Teamwork makes the dream work. That works. Can y'all hear me? All right. I got too many moving parts up here. So. Well, anybody in this room that knows me is that I'm already struggling. I got to do the Darnell thing already to keep from crying. Darnell Arnold, you all know that tapping she always does to keep from crying. I've already started it. Thank you, Georgella. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Can you all hear me? It's great to be here, back home with you all in this place and in this room. This workshop, this place has meant a lot to me as a writer. I was never here as a participant, though. I've been thinking about that. I was never here as a participant. I applied once and I didn't get in. And I cried about it. And years later, when I became an instructor, I already had it in my mind that Mike Mullins didn't like me for some reason. But of course, when I met Mike, I thought it was confirmed then when I met him that he didn't like me. But of course, I was wrong. He did. I learned quickly that that was Mike's way. And we quickly became friends. I was telling Georgella, every time I drive onto this campus, I almost start crying about everything, but just over Mike. I was devastated at Mike's passing and still am. We were friends. When I think about this workshop, I think about how much he teased me at the beginning of every workshop. I feel like that snake sentence that he always talked about, even though I heard y'all saw one, there was a copperhead, but he always said that, and then I was ready to go home after he talked about the snakes. But this is a place where I'm talking about crying. This is a place where I've cried so much. I cried over in that corner over there when I was being interviewed for a James Steele KET documentary years ago. I've cried in my room up on the hill where I've worked on my own work a time or two when I've been here. I've cried at Mr. Steele's cabin in all of the writer he was and the writer's life and how he lived it. I've cried hello and goodbye with many of you all in this room when we've been here. I've brought my family here with me. When I taught in the 20 that Nikki Finney put on here, I brought my grandson. I had custody of my grandson at the time, so I brought my husband and my grandson and tried to teach during that week. And it was that kitchen right back there during dumplings and dancing that I had been asked to do a demonstration. So I brought my grandmother's dress and a picture of my grandmother, and I put it on that counter back there, and I did a demonstration about chicken and dumplings. And somewhere, even though I've done that before, years ago, when my grandmother died and I was taxed, my mother was mentally ill, and so I was taxed as being, for our little part of the family, the one who was going to do the cooking. And I thought, Lord, I'm 30. How in the world am I going to take on this big task and do it as well as my grandmother? So I said, come on, Granny, and I put her dress up in the kitchen, and she helped me through that first Thanksgiving. So when Brent had asked me to do dumplings and dancing, I thought, well, is this a Food Network? What am I supposed to do? I don't know. So I put Granny's dress in the car, and there was pictures of us back there when I was making that big thing of dumplings that people liked, even though it was a little too salty, but people liked it. So that moment led me to the essay that I wrote that came out in Emergence magazine called Praise. The essay was called Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghost, which led to the new book, Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghost. So this workshop is deep and meaningful for me, as it is for many of you all. It's been a place that's been instrumental in my life. I've had life-changing experiences here. I've watched other writers have life-changing experiences. We won't talk about what age I just turned, but there are several people in this audiences that were my students. And whether I taught them at Moorhead or wherever I taught them, or at the Carnegie Center, I said, what you need to do is go to Hyman and go to the Appalachian Writers Workshop. And so many of them have been coming more than me, like they're still here, even though I haven't been able to come. So I'm grateful. I've gone around and around the bend about what to speak with you all about today. Just the fact that it's called the Jim Wayne Miller lecture was stopped me. I told Georgella that I do these things all the time, and I'm always like, well, I'll just do this one again. I'll just do this. And I think I came up with about 3 different things to talk about. And finally, I threw them all away and came up with this. So I hope that it's helpful to you all. At one point, I decided I was just going to read from Praise Song. I was going to do what the marketing team wants me to do, even though the book is not, 6 months away. And I decided I'm not going to do that tonight, that there'll be another time when we can do that, even though I think you can pre-order the book if you want to back there with Reed Spotted Newt. So I'm instead going to talk about my writing life from the beginning, and I hope that is helpful to you all as writers, and I hope I say something that's helpful to many of you all in this room. And if we have time at the end, I might read a little bit from Praise Song, or not. I'm gonna be out talking about it for long. Y'all gonna hear more than you want to hear about it. So, 3 things about this presentation. I'm gonna try not to be self-deprecating, which I'm prone to do. Just know that I do love myself. I'm proud of myself, even though I'm from a place that almost demands that you be self-deprecating. The people where I'm from, which is the people that y'all are from, sort of demands that too, that you don't get above your raising, pipe it down. I already said it. I'm going to try not to cry. So Darnell's not here, but she is. And I'm going to try something different. I'm very comfortable reading. I was a bashful child, and I am a bashful adult, even though this is what I do. I'm a professor at the University of Kentucky. I stand in front of crowds all the time. I travel all over the country. reading my work and lecturing, but I am still little Chrissy from the holler, bashful as all get out. So I'm comfortable with a book in front of me or papers, but I'm going to try not to do that either. So anyway, here we go. And I'm talking about family, so that just means that I'm going to cry. So this first picture that you see here is, I think it sums up who I was and who I am. The false face, this was my favorite thing to do, was to put on this cowl, false face. And if you notice, this is the sign of a shy child. Like I was always holding myself. So like George Ellis said, my mother's absence was a big part of my early life. The fact that my mother wasn't around, the fact that I was called the crazy woman's daughter by some, because people would say, you know, small place, small town. We've been hearing a lot about small towns lately, but we won't go there. But from a small area, and people knew who we were, so they'd say, "Oh, you're one of them Wilkinson girls. Which one are you?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm Dorsey's daughter." And they'd say, because my mother had been diagnosed as being a paranoid schizophrenic. So, little Chrissy holding herself, big Chrissy holding herself up here. All right, Corey. We're in trouble already. Maybe, let's see. It's not advancing. Oh, maybe I'll use these.
I
Nope.
think it's actually playing. I'm confused about that.
I knew it. As soon as anytime the T word is used, technology, there's a guarantee that it was working fine earlier.
I know. I had it all set up, and then I leave, and then everything falls apart, just like it did earlier this week.
Maybe, do you have to enable the editing? Right there at the top. You have to hit that. Wesley Brown, you know how to do a cell phone, and you. I'm just messing with you. Maybe you have to hit the enable editing.
I don't have the. That's gonna work. Okay. I thought it was gonna ask me to sign in. I was like, I don't have it. Okay, now we should.
All righty. Corey, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So I'm the daughter of Dorsey Jean Wilkinson and Eugene Washington. My mother had a nervous breakdown 2 years before I was born. And as she recovered, my grandparents sent her to Hamilton, Ohio, to live with my auntie. And my mother found work there as a laundress, which is a fancy word to say she cleaned houses for white folks. And it was there that she met my father, who was a roustabout. They were actually the same age. The picture I have of him he's a little older in that picture, but the picture of my mother there is about the time that they met. My mother had already spent about a year in Eastern State Mental Hospital before she got better and was sent to live with my auntie. But she fell in love with my father and became pregnant with me. And while she was pregnant, she quit taking her medicine. And by the time I was born, she was in a bad way. And so my father was not giving her the support that she needed. My aunt had twin girls, 2 children of her own to raise. And so when I was 6 weeks old, my grandparents came and got us and took us to Casey County, to Indian Creek, and that's where I was raised. So William Blake says in Auguries of Innocence, to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. So auguries are in essence omens or signs, and these auguries that Blake speaks of are signs of innocence, but they're also signs, I think, of the ways in which a writer thinks. So my parents and the circumstances of my birth were my first signs that I would become a writer. I often imagine, I've not written about it, but I often imagine what it was like in that car driving along from Hamilton, Ohio to the gravel roads of Indian Creek, what was said in that car, how my mother behaved since she was becoming in a bad way. She was very sick by that time. How my grandmother felt as a mother, how my grandfather felt. I think my uncle was driving the car, and my older cousin said he remembers being in that car. But that moment, that augury gave me my first haunt as a writer. One of the things I'm haunted by is the rural-city divide. And a lot of times when I'm writing about the city, my father is one of the things that I'm thinking about. I'm also haunted by mental illness as a writer, and these were things that were circumstances of my birth. This is the house that I grew up in. After I was born, I never saw my father again until I was 13 years old, and I only saw him one other time before he died. My mother would live in this house with us off and on, and she went in and out of both Kentucky State Hospital and Eastern State Hospital for the first 10 or so years of my life. By the 70s, she was taking psychotropic drugs that seemed to work, and she eventually was able to function. But I was raised here in this house with my grandparents. My grandfather went to the 3rd grade. My grandmother went to the 8th grade. But they, particularly my grandmother, wanted me to be educated. My grandmother always wanted to be a teacher, but her parents wouldn't let her, so she poured those hopes and dreams into me. So this is a picture in the back of our house of my grandmother. So because of this woman here, I could read by the time I reached kindergarten. Like most of you, my love of writing began with a love of reading. Most of the women that my grandmother cleaned house for were teachers, and she would get books for me from them. I was also allowed to order books from the Weekly Reader once I was in school. My grandmother always said that once I had read all the books in the house, I began to write my own. I couldn't count worth a dime. I still can't without my fingers, and sometimes if there's a real clock around, I might not know what time it is. But I excelled in reading and writing. I was a painfully shy child who preferred to write instead of speaking. So writing even then became empowering for me. I would often write notes to my grandmother to tell her what I wanted or to explain myself instead of speaking it out loud. And like I said, you can see the back of our house here. We had a wood and coal burning stove, no running water, no indoor toilet. I didn't really live daily with an indoor toilet till after I went to college. But I think the routine of our lives also informed my writing process. When you live that way, as some of you all probably did, you had a lot to do before you even got breakfast. We had to take out the slop jar. I had to grab a bucket and go to the well if my grandfather hadn't done it yet. I had to warm up the water on the stove. I had to take my bath and then come in and begin breakfast and began my day. So I think that also helped shape me as a writer. little picture of little Chrissy and her little, I didn't have any black dolls either, and her doll. That's also in front of our house. So my middle and high school years were combined. I went to a school that really from kindergarten all the way to, I think it went up to the 6th grade, 6th or 7th, and then went to the high school after that. So I'm still excelling in school, especially in reading and writing. I've skipped the 2nd grade because they didn't give me the math test or ask me to tell time or do my multiplication tables. I've been reading on a high school level by this time as a young girl. I'm still shy. I'm reading mostly comic books and whatever I can get from the weekly reader. I'm too young to be interested in romance, but I'm reading romance comedies because or romance comic books because my grandmother was not watching what I was buying at the dime store. I'm writing bad rhyming poems. I'm sending letters to the editor. So this was, again, writing was empowering for me. And I didn't really think about people reading it on the other end. So my family was pretty much the only black family. Every black person I knew until I went to college was related to me. And so things would happen. There was a lot of racism in my school. And so I didn't say much, but I'd sit down and I'd write a poem, or I'd write a letter to the editor, and I'd send it to the newspaper, and to my surprise, they would publish it. So I guess I was a little activist, too, with all of these things as I was sending them in. And I'm also submitting things at an early age. I am sending things. I didn't think of it as submitting. I just wanted to communicate with the outside world as an only child living up a holler with their grandparents, not having any other people who looked like me around. So I would write letters to Highlights. Y'all remember, anybody in here? I wrote letters to Highlights magazine. I wrote letters to Scholastic. And so I became, as many, I think me and Robert Geip are the same age. So he knows all about Zoom, and some of you all probably do too. So I loved Zoom, and so I wrote them a letter, and I wrote a song to replace the opening song of Zoom was fabulous, but I wrote another song to replace it. And nothing ever became of it, but they actually responded back. And from responding back, I got a letters from the producers of Zoom. I, at probably 12, became a member of the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers because of Zoom. And I began to feel like I was closer to something. I didn't know what it was, but I felt like, okay, maybe this is it. I could do this. I like this. And so then in high school, I met this woman. This was my high school English teacher. Her name is Judy Sapp. And Miss Sapp was probably about 10 years older than us, even if 10 years. Most of our teachers were old. I can use that word now, but at the time we were thinking, oh, all our teachers are old. But Miss Sapp was fresh out of college. She had jet black hair at the time that came down to her behind. She wore these John Lennon glasses, and she was excited about books. I had never seen anything like it. I fell in love with Miss Sapp. So again, thinking about me and what was going on in my life, I'm being called the N-word almost every day. My mother is still in and out of Eastern State Hospital. I'm silenced, but I'm reading, I'm writing, and then there's Miss Sapp. Because of her, I began to write more stories and poems, and I kept them in a box under my bed. So by this time, as you can see by Zoom, it's in the 70s. She has us write short stories and gives us feedback. And I was like, wow, she knows what she's talking about. She helped me improve these stories. She has us read books. We read 1984, and we read Watership Down, which became my favorite book. We're reading Dickens. We read Frankenstein, everything. Miss Sapp was the world. She was the it. I was so excited about her, still love her. And so I worshiped Mrs. Sapp. And like I said, at home, my mother's still ill. I'm still painfully bashful. I'm probably being too truthful. This is being recorded, isn't it? So there are things going on in our church. I'm being molested in church. I'm not talking about any of these things, but I'm writing. I'm getting introduced to a larger world through books and magazines, but I still didn't really know what it meant to be a writer. I didn't know not one black writer. I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know what that meant. So my grandparents met with a high school counselor who suggested I could go get a job with the FBI. So in the 70s, I don't know if anybody had this experience, in the 70s, the FBI was recruiting heavy. And they were recruiting people for typing pools. So I could type over 100 words a minute. And so the counselor thought this would be a great opportunity for me to go work for the FBI. And some people who were in that typing pool were able to move up. And one of my classmates actually became an agent, but that's not what I wanted to do. But my grandmother was my advocate. And they talked about me like in third person. Well, what does she want to do? I was sitting right there. What does she want to do? Well, I don't know. She likes to write and read awfully well. And she's good at it, my grandmother said. And so the woman said, well, maybe she should major in journalism. So she put down journalism, and off I went. So I graduated from high school at 16 because I had skipped a grade because of all that good reading I could do and that good writing and no math. But so this, you see that headline, Crystal Wilkinson helps put Casey County High School on the map. So I had won a scholarship. This is me at 16, my mother, and my art teacher, Mr. Patton. So Mr. Patton really wanted me to become a visual artist because that was my other thing, is that I could draw. And my scholarship was actually in visual art. But I wanted to be a writer, and they said that I should major in journalism, so that's what I did. I went to Eastern Kentucky University, and I majored in journalism. I was an art minor until I took that art history class. And then I wasn't even an art minor anymore. And I lost my scholarship because I was like, I can't. No, thank you. So I majored in journalism because they said that's what I should do. I took speech classes to try to get over my bashfulness. I was bashful to a fault. I did work study in the library at Eastern. I took as many creative writing classes as I could. I was a journalism major who was too bashful to interview anybody, so my A's in my first journalism class all turned into F's when professor's name was Libby Frost, and coming from the good Christian home that I did, when she questioned me about it, I said, I have to tell you, I made all this up. I didn't interview anybody because I just can't do it. And all my A's turned into F's. But I finished at Eastern, and that was also a year. I was very naive. First of all, 16, straight off the holler. I come from a very religious people, and I had never, this sounds ridiculous, but I did not understand why anybody would lie or why anybody would have an intention to hurt somebody. I did not understand that. So as a freshman in college, some girls told me that something happened to one of their relatives, and I let them use my car. My grandfather had bought me a 1976 Pacer, and I said, okay, I hope he's okay. And they kept my car for a week, driving all over the state. I trusted the young men, so in my freshman year was horrible. I was sexually molested again, and so that all became a part of everything. But again, all of those experiences were things, I used to say I would put them in my pocket close to the bone for safekeeping. and they became things that I was haunted by as a writer. So I was very trusting. You know, it sort of followed in my mother's footsteps. I found my own no-count man, my very own. And, like my mama had done, I had a baby by him. And so I was a college sophomore, and I had a child. But because I was raised by Christine Wilkinson, and because I had my own tenacity, because I wanted to be a writer, I never set out. I had my son in the middle of midterm. I left my class pregnant, went to the hospital, had my son, came back with my baby in my arms, and took my midterms. And finished the journalism degree like I was supposed to. So after I graduated from Eastern with a journalism degree, I moved to Lexington with my son, and I worked at the Herald Leader. I worked as a news assistant, writing education, news, not really the news. I never did a really big article except a couple of obits. When people died in the middle of the night and I was working, I'd get excited because I could write a whole story instead of just a little thing. So that's what I did. So all these years, I'm still writing on the side. This is my son. When he was a little bit older, that's in my grandparents' backyard. You can see the smokehouse, which I write about a lot, in the background. And to the left of him in the back, you can't see, but there's a whale there that I also write about a lot. So I'm always writing for work, but I'm also writing on the side. I'm writing poems. And these were some of the jobs that I worked. So I was a news assistant. I was an accounts receivable supervisor for a window company. I was a public relations officer for the urban county government in Lexington. I was a PR person for the Hope Center, which is a homeless shelter in Lexington. And finally, I started working at the Carnegie Center, and I worked in marketing at Midway College. So I was a single mom, and I worked at night at UK Hospital running x-rays to the ER. I was a telephone operator at J. Peterman. Tyne Daly, y'all remember Tyne Daly? Was my first customer at that call center. I worked at the makeup counter at Walgreens. Still love some good cheap lipstick. I cleaned offices. I delivered newspapers, but still it was always reading and writing for me. I began going to readings and conferences, and these were some of the people that I met. So here's a quick timeline over the next 10 years or so. And many of these people you'll recognize. And I guess I know I'm stumbling around here because this is the third or fourth presentation that in my mind to do, and I thought that this would be helpful. Because I went to all of these things with a hunger. You know, I went to everything I could with a hunger to become a writer. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how other people had done it. I wasn't going up to people. One, I was too shy, and I just thought it was wrong just to go up to people and say, hey, I want to be a writer. Tell me how to do it. But I just put myself in these places, and these were some of the people that I'm grateful for. And this is when these faces come up is when I'm going to start crying. I'm not going to cry. So just like you all showing up here, I showed up where writing and writers were. I wrote and I read, and I showed up wherever writing happened. Mr. Steele, I met at, I can't say I met him because I was always standing across the room looking at him like, oh my God, it's James Steele, oh my God. And I remember I saw him at one of the Kentucky book fairs, I believe, and he was signing books, and it was Frank Walker who said, go on over there to the meeting. And I was like, it's Mr. Steele. I am not going over there. And so I loved his writing, of course, and has taught his books many, many times, but from afar, not from close up because I was too shy to go close up, but from afar, he taught me a lot about how to be a writer, about getting the work done and making a life, making room in his life to do his work, and being kind and considerate and generous while he did it. James Baker Hall. I did a reading in Lexington, and I finally got bold enough, and I would always do things like, okay, everybody's reading a little bit from what I'm going to do it tonight. And I would take deep breaths, and I would tell the host, okay, can you put me next? And then they would say, and now, and I go, no, I'm not going to do it. And so one night I got brave enough to read a little piece, and James Baker Hall came up to me and said, that was good. What's your name again? I said, Crystal Wilkinson. And he said, well, tell me about what you're working on. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so he was one. Same thing with Wendell. Of course, I knew who Wendell Berry was. Wendell Berry did not know who Crystal Wilkinson was, but I knew who he was. And I read once with the Appalachian Poets, and he remembered what I had read and talked to me about it. And he was talking to me, and he said, well, I was telling Ernie, blah, blah, blah. He went on about this Ernie, and I kept thinking, Ernie? Who in the world is he talking about? He was talking about his good friend, Ernest Gaines. And that's how I met Wendell. This woman here, I took workshops from wherever I could. You all know who this is? Ann Shelby. She was always teaching workshops at the Carnegie Center or somewhere, and I would go and find her. This woman, who was also somebody that I was afraid of, because I knew who she was. And she was so famous that I was scared to talk to her. And so she remembers us being in that car together, but I watched her and admired her for so long before that. And she would not let me be a fangirl, so we became friends. She just would not let me fan out. And then when I drove her, and after we made that long drive, I think I was driving, when we made that long drive, we became friends. And I've learned a lot about writing and writing life from you, Georgella, and have carried it with me all these years. When she said we talked about our children, I was a single mom by then. I think I had my other two, so I had 3 children by then. And she would talk about her kids, and I would think, I said, oh, it's Georgia the Lion, and she's having problems with her son, and she's still writing too, so I can do this too. I already had this picture of, so them as a couple, I think, influenced me, my writing life, and also influenced what I thought about relationships. You know, the idea of the no-count man went out the door, and I wanted somebody who was going to love me like these two loved, and somebody who could talk books with me. And it took me forever, but I finally found it. But I was inspired by them in so many ways. The Appalachian Poets, of course. Y'all see young Crystal looking all sexy in the middle? Black hair, no dye. Look at that. Anyway, so the Appalachian Poets was a place where I found home. And, you know, we would get, and so I encourage you to find a group of people, and it doesn't have to be a named group. We weren't a named group at first. You see B. Clay. Where'd he go? Oh. Bernard was a baby when we took Bernard in as an Appalachian poet. But we would get in the back room somewhere or go to a coffee house, and I mean, they would tear your work up. There was you hugged at the door, you came in, and you talked about your work, and then you hugged again when you went out. But your work was elevated by being in that room, and I loved them, still love them for that. Nikki, Also became a fast friend. She's one of my best friends now, but there was a time where I stood back across the room from Nikki. I was like, oh, Nikki Finney over there. On Wings Made of Gauze. I read that book. Really the best friend to have, the best writing friend to have, also tough. None of this, well, oh, I like it. That's nice. I really like this line. Like, it was some hard work, and we worked together a lot and continue to. And she continues to give me advice. And this man here, I can't say enough about Gurney. Gurney, as many of you all know, maybe all of you know, is the I've always called him. He used to call me the godmother of literary things in Lexington, and I always called him he would be the grandfather and the Johnny Appleseed for writing and writers programs. There are so many writing workshops, writing programs all across, not just Kentucky, but across the region that were because of Gurney. And I don't think the Appalachian poets, as they were, would have been there without Gurney's encouragement. When I was beginning to put my first book together, and was still, painfully shy, I'm just kind of like, oh, deer in the headlights kind of thing. It was Gurney who said, you need to do something with these. You need to send these out. You need to let people see them. And I was just like, no, Gurney. And so you all know about Gurney. There he is. And I think we need to hold Gurney up more. We are having a big celebration of him at UK in the fall. I hope some of y'all can come to that. We'll be putting the word out. And a couple others. Just the Kentucky Women Writers Conference was where I met women like Dorothy Allison, who I was in Dorothy Allison's workshop, and I did a little, y'all know Dorothy Allison? She cusses a lot, and I love it. So I had written something, and that was before I started cussing. I didn't start really cussing until my mama died, but I can cuss like a sailor now. I won't do it. I won't demonstrate for y'all, but I know how to do it now. But I was in a workshop with Dorothy Allison, and I had written something, and she asked us to read back at the Women Writers Conference, and I read a little bit, and she was like, cuss word, girl. That's good. And so that, again, there was this kind of encouragement. And so the last thing before I got published was this. So this was the Hurston Wright Writers Workshop. And I had been to every workshop in Kentucky. And, I love my Appalachian people, but most of y'all are white. Y'all can tell in this room. It's okay. Most of y'all are white. And so I wanted to really be with some black writers. And so I was thumbing through Essence Magazine. And in Essence Magazine, there was a little ad for the Hurston Wright Writers Workshop, the first one in 1990. And I was working at Midway College at the time, and I decided if I didn't advocate for myself and my children to have a better life, to go down the path toward what I wanted, then nobody else was going to do it. So I went to the president, who was Robert Botkin at the time, and I said, there is this writing workshop in Virginia that I would really like to go to. I know my job involves writing, but I'm talking about short stories, and I'm talking about novels, and I'm talking about poetry. Is there any way that the college could help me go? And he said yes. And what he meant by yes was that they were going to pay my entry fee, which I can't remember how much it was, and he gave me the presidential car from Midway College to drive. Now, before y'all, I saw some of y'all go, ooh, wow. It was like a 1980 Lincoln Continental. It probably wasn't 1980, but it was close to it. And so he gave me his presidential car to drive to this conference. And then this is where I met these two women. And so to the left is Marita Golden, who founded the Hurston Wright Conference. And to the right is Marie Brown, who really changed. She was Alice Walker's agent. She really changed the way that Black people were perceived in literature. She was one of the first Black literary agents in New York. She had worked for, I think, Putnam Doubleday, or I think at the time it was Doubleday. And so here I am, still older, but still innocent. And I go and I have this workshop all week, and I thought I was going to meet a whole lot of Black people, and all the faculty were white, which was fine. I worked with Bob Shikosis, and he also changed my life. But then we were invited into this little room with Marie Brown. I had no idea who she was. And she said, well, I like the story of yours that I read. Do you have more? And I said, yeah, I have a whole box full of them under my bed. And she said, well, send them to me. And I said, okay. And then Marita got me over in the corner and grabbed me by the shoulders, and she said, Crystal, this is Marie Brown. She's a famous literary agent. She wants to see your work. Do you have a book? And I said, I have a whole lot of stories. I don't know. And she said, well, put them together and send them to her. So I sent them to Marie Brown, and that's what became Blackberries. And I can't say, again, I'm sort of self-deprecating, but I'm also have lived a life as this, like I keep saying, this bashful person just sort of stumbling my way through with intent and purpose, but because I put my feet on the path, things happen. They felt sometimes like an accident, but if I hadn't been there, if I hadn't had the presidential car, if I hadn't had the gumption to ask Dr. Bakken, could I go to this conference? I didn't know anybody at this conference. This would have never happened. Blackberries would have never happened. So, Blackberries was my first book. Marie didn't really want me to publish with Toby Press. Toby Press was weird. I don't know if any of you all remember, but when Toby Press came out, they had an office in Connecticut, they had one in Jerusalem, and they had one in London. And they wanted to publish this book, but they didn't get it. So my editor was from Scotland and didn't understand nothing that I was writing. She didn't understand Black colloquial English. She didn't understand anything that I was saying that was Appalachian. She just didn't get it. We finally worked our way through. The other thing about Toby Press is that although they were putting ads in the New Yorker, Harper's, the Atlantic, when Joseph Beth asked for my book, they didn't want to put it in the bookstores. They wanted people to buy from them direct. And these are all the reasons why Marie didn't want me to go with them, but I did. And just to be up front, and I'm going to go a little bit faster so I don't run out of time, but just to be up front, writers never talk about money, so I'm going to talk about money. So I got $5,000 for Blackberries, plus royalties. And I thought, oh my God, this will buy a whole lot of diapers. This will do something. This is great. So after Blackberries, I went on to publish Water Street with Toby Press. And Water Street was part of a 2-book deal. And the second book was supposed to be Fat, Black, and Country. And I never wrote that second book. But they paid me $15,000 for a 2-book deal. And sometimes if you look up my name and you've got Google on the right night, it comes up and says that I wrote a book called Fat, Black, and Country, but I did not. But I was paid $15,000 for that 2-book deal. And so I went to Spalding University. I decided I wanted to get my MFA. So by then, my mother was doing better. My mother kept my children. I went and did a low residency because I wanted to know even more about writing. So I wrote. And I had started a novel. So Water Street was published in 2002. And I was working on a novel. And I couldn't quite crack the nut of that book. I just could not figure out the timeline. I couldn't figure out the structure. But my friend A.J. Verdell said, structure is the last frontier. And you know how you catch a gem, and you all probably have caught a lot of them this week. So she said, structure is the last frontier. And I caught that. And so from 2002 to 2016, structure is the last frontier. I'm walking around with it as I'm writing and trying to get this book finished. So I finally got it finished. By then, Marie Brown had some health problems. She was moving on. And so I had a second agent. And my second agent tried all the New York presses. She couldn't get the book published. And then University Press of Kentucky said that they wanted to see it. And so University Press of Kentucky published The Birds of Opulence, and they paid me $1,000. And I was ecstatic. I was so happy to get that book out in the world. I had turned down a couple of places that wanted, sometimes publishers go with fads. So they wanted, like, if you take all the grandmothers out and just let it be the young women in this book, if y'all read it, it wouldn't be the same book. Then I'll publish it. And I said, no. And so there were fights like that, but they published it. And then a couple years later, you can see these different covers. UPK put Water Street and Blackberries out in different versions. And then, so there's Birds of Opulence. And then I was talking to Rebecca Gale Howe. You all know her. She's a friend of Hyman too. Brilliant friend, brilliant writer, brilliant editor. So Rebecca wanted to see some of my poetry, and she knew I had a lot of poetry. And she wanted to see it for Fireside at the time when she was editor of Fireside. And she was also working on an anthology. And I thought, okay, Rebecca, me, poetry, I write it, but let's just keep it in the box. And she said, well, just send me something. And she kept saying, well, send me something. And I sent her my whole file. I have a file on my computer that says poetry. I sent her the whole file. And so she called me and she said, I think you have a book. And I said, no, I don't have a book. And she's like, let me work with this. Let me take a look at it. And, I'm being flip about it, but Rebecca, Perfect Black would not be in existence without Rebecca. It would be in a box because I didn't think it was a book. But she began to talk about what themes she saw, and I was like, oh, yeah. And then I realized that some of the things that I was writing about, a couple years ago were the same things I was writing about decades ago, that I continued to be haunted by these same things. So I began to shape the book with Rebecca's advice, and UPK bought it, and you all know what happened. It won the NAACP Image Award. And Perfect Black, I also got $1,000 for Perfect Black and was ecstatic about it. So then this brings us to Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghost, and then I'll close. I want to have time for questions. I don't know how. I feel like I'm babbling. I don't know how much time we have. But so Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghost, I told you where it started. I had an essay called Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghost that was in Emergence magazine. And this is another Appalachian Writers Connection. Ronnie Lundy. Ronnie Lundy read Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghost as an essay, and she loved it. And Ronnie Lundy said, and I wouldn't have known Ronnie Lundy if I had not been here on these grounds. This is where I met Ronnie Lundy. And she said, well, I'm going to, do you mind if I send this to my food agent? I didn't know there was such a thing. And I said, yeah, if you want to. Send it to your food agent. Whatever that meant. I was like, well, okay. I don't mind. Send it to whoever. And so Lisa Eckes, who's the food writing agent, contacted me, and she said, I'd like for you to write a book proposal around this book. And I said, okay. We're in the middle of COVID. Why not? I'll take a stab at it. And I started thinking, and just even in the proposal, things just started pouring out of me about my grandparents and about my ancestry and things that I had in the essay and things that I didn't have in the essay. So I put together about a 200-page book proposal. That book, when Lisa got it, helped me clean it up, it went to auction. Norton was at the table. St. Martin's was at the table. Random House was at the table. Clarkson Potter was at the table. Probably about 7 publishers were at that table. And she called and she said, "We have a preempt." And I was like, "What is a preempt? I don't know what that means." And she said, "Well, we have 6 figures on the table." And I said, "Like dollars?" And she said, "Yes, we have 6 figures on the table and we're not finished. Do you want to stop here?" And I thought, and I said, "So does this mean if I stop here, am I going to, I'm from poor people. If I stop, if I keep going, is this like playing the slot machine? Am I going to lose all this?" And she said, "No, we'll go up or we'll just come back." And so it kept going, and the book went for 6 figures. So Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghost went. Now that sounds, if y'all want to talk about it, we can. That sounds better than what actually, the way that it goes down. You don't get 6 figures they don't just send you a big check. That's not how it works. They send you a little tiny check, then they send you another little tiny check, and then when the book's published, you get another check. Then a year after the book's published, you get another check, and so forth and so on. But it was more than I could have imagined. And so I'm going to stop babbling right here. But the reason why I wanted to sort of unveil all of that is the rudder through all of that is I wanted to be a writer. I didn't care if I got paid $0, like many of the early stories and poems that I sent out. No money, just, I always thought I wanted to be published by a magazine that I heard of. My first story was published in Now and Then magazine, and I was like, yes, this is it. I've made it. And then I just kept being present at workshops, at conferences, going to readings of other writers and meeting other writers. But most of all, I kept writing. I kept writing. And, my point is, Nikki told me this story one time. I never had a chance to meet Toni Morrison, but Nikki Finney told me this story that she stood in line once to meet Toni Morrison. And Toni Morrison knew who Nikki was. He knew of her because they had some of the same friends. And Nikki was doing that whole thing like we do, like, it's Toni Morrison. And she got up, and she said that Toni Morrison was signing books, and she looked up at her and said, "Are you doing your work?" And she said it startled her, but she realized what she was saying. Are you getting your work done? And I think that's what I want to close with, is that's really what it's all about. Ernest Gaines said one time, "I want to give you all the perfect advice about writing." And everybody was like, "Ooh, what is it?" And everybody leaned up close and had their pens out, and he said, 6 things. Read, read, read. Write, write, write. And I think in addition to those things, come at things, do things like this. You've got to do the work. And really, nothing else matters. Do the work. Thank you all. Thank you all. So I know we're hot. All of these wonderful bodies in here together has made it even hotter. But if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take a couple questions, and then I'll sign books if you want to. And I think, Mandy, out at the table, you can pre-order Praise Song if you'd like. Any questions, large or small? Yes. Oh, he asked what my favorite recipe from the book is. Chicken and dumplings. My grandmother's chicken and dumplings. That's my favorite one. Yeah, that and blackberry cobbler. Jam cake, don't get me started. All of them. Yeah. And speaking of blackberries, thank you. This is how magical the Appalachian Writers Workshop is. When I pulled in, I thought, well, I'm going to be late, so I should go on. I passed Yoder's, and I said, I wonder if they have blackberry jam. And it'll probably be closed by the time I get out tonight. So I thought, well, I guess I missed out. I pull in over here. Robert's sitting there talking to this young man right here. And he said, I have something for you. And he pulled a jar of blackberry jam out of his bag. The magic of Hyman. Thank you. I saw a hand. Yes.
I'm curious about your love for Prince.
Ah.
He has such beautiful lyrics and amazing lyrics. Has it influenced your writing?
Absolutely. He asked about my love for Prince. Somewhere on the long list of books that I want to write is a Prince book. And, I don't want to dive into this too much because I don't want to trigger anybody else and not trigger myself. But I fell in love with Prince the year that I was undergoing sexual abuse. And, his work was so sexy and sex-driven, but it was really healing to me that I was such a buttoned-up church girl, and this horrible thing was happening to me. And he was so wild. He was sort of a secret, because if my grandmother knew that I was listening to Prince, or if she had seen that album with no, she would not. She would not have let me listen to that. But I feel like he saved me. And continued and continues to do so now. So I'm both inspired by him. I'm inspired by his lyrics, but I'm also inspired by his life as a writer, as an artist. This man would stay up all night long. He would do one take for some of those songs. When I went to his studio, I had a chance to go to his studio. I felt like I was, it went to Mecca or something. I was just like, oh my gosh, Prince touched this. And I got to hold his guitar. Look on my Facebook if y'all need to see it and see the joy on my face from that. One more question. Yes?
What was the most difficult part about writing Praise Song for the Kitchen Go?
I think the most difficult part is that on the cover here is one of my relatives. Her name was Patsy Rife, and she looks a lot like my daughters, actually, my twin daughters. But her mother was Aggie Wilkinson, and she was likely enslaved, but before she was Aggie Wilkinson, she was called Aggie of Color. And Charlton Wilkinson was the white man who owned her, but he was also her husband. Like, he never married a white woman. He was with her for their whole lives. And so the difficulty was thinking about Aggie's mother and her father and coming to terms with the fact that I'll never know who they are. But on my white side, I can trace it all the way back to, I don't know, Genghis Khan. Like, it just keeps going and going and going. It keeps going. I can trace all the way back in England, but I can't on the other side. But thank you for that question. All right. Thank you all for such a warm welcome home. Thank you to Jim Wayne's family, and just thank everybody. I'm not going to cry again. Thank you all so much.
How about one more round of applause for Miss Whipple from the evening? It was certainly a pleasure, Crystal, to bring you home to Hyman once again. So anytime you want to come back, you're welcome here. She's going to stay. She ain't going to leave. That's all we want to hear. I think before we wrap up, Robert Gopp, you have something to say?
So, tradition here at the workshop on the closing night is that anybody who's here and is interested, we do a group reading recitation of the Briar Sermon, which was a major poem of Jim Wayne Miller's about Appalachian identity. And so everyone's invited to come out to the parking lot. We got such a big bunch this year. We're probably gonna have to do some choreography just so everybody can hear and the line flows smoothly. So we'll be figuring that out. But this year we're going to add a poem from Perfect Black to that reading, because there's some pieces in there that speak to the same impulses that Jim Wayne is speaking to in the Briar Sermon. So that's something we've been talking about for a couple years, and so it's awesome that Crystal's here. Anyway, you belong in that circle. And so we're putting you in there this year, and if I have anything to do with it, we're going to leave you in there. So, but anyway, so that'll take place after the reading, and everybody that's here is invited, and look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
I appreciate you, Robert, organizing all that. Did Did you have? After the book signing, yes. So that does so before everyone breaks off, just so you understand what we have going on. Well, there is a book signing reception, so all the faculty will be kind of spread out. We have Crystal is going to be over here where she's sitting at now, and then there's Mr. Joy will be here. There'll be other folks on in the dining hall at tables marked with their names on them. So please feel free to get all your books signed. I think the Newt is still open for those last-minute purchases. And there is also a grazing table in there for finger foods and snacks for us to enjoy. So thank you all so much.